The Irish Revolutionary Period. The most influential, defining period in Irish history. The main event of which was, of course, the War of Independence, where the Irish Republican Army took on the RIC and British forces in a tactical guerrilla war in which intel was everything. But it wasn't just the IRA, was it? There was also the women's paramilitary organisation, Cumann, who, although not as well known as the IRA, were also very important to this war. But after the War of Independence came the Civil War, and although the split of the IRA is very well known, Cumann, well, as with almost everything about him, there's little to no mention of it. So let's fix that, shall we? Now, it would be unfair to continue this without first giving an overview of this women's-only organisation. Cumann was founded in April 1914 in Dublin. The name translates into English as the Irish Women's Council. The organisation was officially founded in Wynn's Hotel, with the objective of the organisation being as follows: to advance the cause of Irish liberty, to organise Irish women in furtherance of this objective, to assist in organising and equipping a body of Irishmen for the defence of Ireland, and to form a fund for these proposals called the Defence of Ireland Fund. Una Ní Kelly was named the first president of Cumann, and the organisation spread across the island. The women supported the Irish volunteers who opted not to enlist in the war during John Redmond's appeal. But Cumann, despite it being its own organisation, was subservient to the Irish volunteers, and later to the IRA. In 1915, Cumann made the decision to adopt a uniform. The uniform consisted of a coat, skirt, belt and hat, which was made of volunteer tweed. In 1916, Una Ní Kelly stepped down as leader of Cumann. Taking over as leader from now up until 1926 is Constance Markievicz, a very influential and well-known figure during the Irish Revolutionary period, and who, along with 276 other women, were involved in the Easter 1916 Rising. During the Easter Rising, most of Cumann acted as Red Cross workers and tended to the wounds of the injured, but there were a notable number who took part in the fighting, especially those who had dual membership with the Irish Citizens' Army. Women were established in almost every stronghold except for Cants and De Valera's. Constance Markievicz was said to have killed a policeman in St. Stephen's Green. Markievicz, along with other women, also carried out sniper attacks on British forces at the College of Surgeons. After the Easter Rising was put down, around 70 women were taken prisoner, but a good portion were quickly released in May of 1916. After the Rising, Cumann were the quickest to organise and get back on their feet, and so they were at the forefront of propaganda, doing things such as keeping the memory of the 1916 leaders alive, prison relief, and opposing conscription and internment. The witness statement of Peg Duggan, who was a member of Cumann in Cork, went over what the women did. We now started working for Republican prisoners in British jails, making scarves, gloves and other comforts. We ran ceilidhs and other functions to provide us with funds. As the prisoners were released, we arranged reception committees and provided meals, accommodation and clothes for those returning home again. Cumann also played a vital role in the 1918 general elections, canvassing for Sinn Féin. Their leader, Markievicz, was elected to the UK Parliament, technically the first woman in the history of the United Kingdom to do so. But as we know, they would not attend Parliament, and instead Sinn Féin would set up their own Parliament in Dublin. Throughout the War of Independence, Cumann were a very important part of the war for the IRA. The women did numerous things such as first aid, providing safe houses for IRA men on the run, and propaganda, fundraising, administrative duties, and storing weapons in their home or in weapon deposits. They would even risk their own lives to deliver weapons to their male counterparts. Moira Comerford, who was one of the women delivering weapons, stated that she learned from experience that a Lee Enfield service rifle could be carried under her coat without protruding at the bottom if the muzzle was held under her ear. Another key role of Cumann played was in gathering intelligence and establishing communications. An example of this was with Bridie O'Mullen, who established a line of communication from Dublin headquarters to each district council in neighbouring counties. She explained, "Information from Athlone would be conveyed by a Cumann cycle dispatch carrier to the nearest Cumann company captain on the route, who in turn would pass it similarly to the adjutant of the Mullingar District Council. The latter would then take over control of the messages and ensure their safe and secret dispatch to Dublin." She also continued, stating, "Most important intelligence work for the IRA had been done by Cumann. The Cumann had various ways of collecting information. Some of the girls being employed in local post offices were able to tap wires from police barracks. Women who worked in shops, restaurants and other public places also found ways to gather intelligence." What also was in Cumann's favour was the British forces' slow reaction to the organisation. Despite knowing of their existence, and they were suppressed and then banned outright very quickly into the war in 1919, for the first year in the war, British forces didn't really seem to take the organisation as seriously as that of the IRA. A reason for this could be because Cumann weren't as physically involved as the IRA in regards of ambushing and actual fighting. However, that is not to say that they weren't trained. Some branches in Limerick did do rifle drills, and there was at least one instance where Cumann directly attacked the enemy, which is during the IRA attack in Kilmallock RSE barracks. Cumann mainly worked on support, as stated, but seeing as the War of Independence was mainly a war of intelligence, Cumann, it could be said, used Britain's lack of care for them to their advantage and became a hard backbone of the Irish intelligence network. However, towards the end of the 1920s, Britain became more aware of the importance of the women in the war. Female searches were introduced and the British began to raid homes of Cumann members. These Cumann members then quickly became victims of the reprisals done by Crown forces such as the Black and Tans. One of these such raids was recorded. Swoops were made at night, entries forced into their homes, and the women's hair cut off in a brutal fashion, as well as suffering other indignities and insults. Assaults of a sexual nature are also documented, as said by Christy McCallum in her research at Cumann. There are a few documented accounts of rape during the War of Independence, however most nationalist women were Catholic and therefore unlikely to admit such incidents. Louise Ryan also inferred that sexual assault could have been used by the Black and Tans as a method of intimidation and to drop morale. However, the band stood strong in the face of the Crown forces and continued their operations up until the truce. On the 11th of July 1921, a truce was called, and it wouldn't be until the 6th of December 1921 that the Anglo-Irish Treaty would be signed. This ended the Irish War of Independence, but it also gave rise to another conflict waiting in the wings. The treaty was highly controversial in Ireland, especially within the IRA. The main issue for many members of the Republican movement was that Ireland was technically not free in two ways. Firstly, the new state was to be called the Irish Free State and was to be given Dominion status like Canada or Australia. Technically free to govern themselves, but still under the British Crown, with the monarch as the head of state. Along with that, Britain would also have key access to Irish ports, and to add insult to injury, everyone in Dáil Éireann would have to swear allegiance to the King. Secondly, 6 counties in Ulster, Derry, Tyrone, Fermanagh, Down, Armagh and Antrim, had the right to leave the Irish Free State and continue being Northern Ireland as was formed under the Government of Ireland Act 1920 to appease the Unionists in the north, which they did. The Cabinet agreed 4-3 to the treaty and it was put to Dáil Éireann, and the arguments were clear. On one hand, people argued that Ireland was not free and that hostilities should resume until the full independence was achieved. On the other hand, people like Michael Collins argued that this was the best we were going to get. The IRA didn't have the ammunition or the resources to keep fighting against the Crown forces. Lloyd George also told Collins during treaty talks that Britain would bring in the full army into Ireland if hostilities resumed. These two sides would go on to be named anti-treaty and pro-treaty respectively. From the Cumann perspective, the 6 female TDs present during the treaty talks in the Dáil were hardline anti-treaty. However, on a vote during July 7, 1922, the treaty passed 64-57, with 3 TDs abstaining. After the vote, De Valera and his supporters left the Dáil. These, of course, included the women who voted against the treaty. On the 5th of February 1922 at the Mansion House, Cumann met to discuss the treaty vote, one of the first organisations to meet to discuss the treaty. Before we continue, it's important to discuss the situation of Cumann at this point. The organisation quickly spread across the island from about 300 branches across the island in October 1920 to between 700 and 800 by February 1922, a massive increase in over 2 years. At the Mansion House, 600 women turned up to discuss the treaty. However, it is important to say that it is estimated 300 branches never sent delegates, and that many of these were likely pro-treaty, because statements from the leadership prior to the meeting implied the vote would favour rejecting the treaty. So this meeting truly represented about half of the organisation. While the majority of people there were anti-treaty, there were still certain pro-treaty members in attendance, such as Jenny Wise-Power, a founding member of Cumann. The meeting went as many expected. Mary McSweeney, one of the TDs who took a hardline stance against the treaty, proposed a resolution that stated, "The executive of Cumann reaffirms its allegiance to the Republic of Ireland, and therefore cannot support the Articles of Agreement signed in London December 6, 1921. Wise-Power, who was aware that the majority in attendance was anti-treaty, suggested a compromise. She suggested that they should leave it to the people to decide, to state that Cumann should reaffirm its loyalty to the Republic, but realising that the treaty will, if accepted by the Irish people, be a big step along the road to the end. We declare that we will not work obstructively against those who support the treaty." However, this stance received very little support, with 419 delegates voting against Wise-Power and only 63 votes in favour. And with that, Wise-Power and her pro-treaty supporters left the convention. The Irish Examiner also reported a week after the Mansion House meeting that the Cork district of Cumann voted against the resolution, reaffirming allegiance to the existing republic. Sides were beginning to be taken, and just like their male counterparts the IRA, Cumann was beginning to fragment. On the 12th of March 1922, once again in the Mansion House, Wise-Power addressed a meeting of 700 women in which the Irish Independent called a remarkable gathering of women. Wise-Power declared the necessity of an organisation to give a platform to the women who supported the treaty. It was here where Cumann was born, and that it would be an independent body of Irish women pledged to work for the securing and maintaining of Ireland's right as an autonomous and sovereign state to determine freely her own form of government. The initial reaction to Cumann was not disdain, but rather it was an attempt of reconciliation. After Cumann was proclaimed, the 6 female TDs wrote a letter to the pro-treaty women asking them to rethink their decision. Heartbreakingly, they said, "It would be better to face Lloyd George together than face a war with each other." However, all attempts at reconciliation failed, and Cumann member Marie Comerford would say that Cumann lost some fine women, Foundation members, other executive members who had helped guide through the war years. All had proved themselves. Soon, Cumann branches began appearing mainly in the east or southeast in areas like Dublin, Wexford, Wicklow, Waterford, but also in areas like Sligo, Tipperary, Kilkenny and Offaly. But it's important to note that some branches renamed themselves Cumann, while others kept their Cumann identity while declaring their allegiance to the Free State, so there could be many more. It was during June elections in 1922 where Cumann began propaganda campaigns for pro-treaty candidates. This countered the influence and support Cumann were given the anti-treaty candidates in their own propaganda campaign. Cumann also produced points for canvasser sheets for their women when canvassing. During election time, escalation between the two organisations began as insults were hurled between the women. Cumann called members of Cumann women of wild characters, while Cumann called members of Cumann wild women. Cumann efforts were rewarded as 58 pro-treaty Sinn Féin candidates were elected in comparison to 36 anti-treaty candidates. This could be considered a victory for Cumann. However, soon relationships between pro and anti-treaty sides deteriorated so much that it led to civil war. On the 28th of June, civil war officially erupted in Ireland. Pro-treaty IRA versus anti-treaty IRA. Brother versus brother. But what most don't talk about is that it was also by extension Cumann versus Cumann. Sister versus sister. Women who fought side by side during the War of Independence now find themselves on different sides of this civil war, and it's never talked about as much as the men. So let's change that. Cumann resumed the role they did during the War of Independence, but in the service of the anti-treaty IRA. They ran safe houses, smuggled weapons and collected intelligence, except now they had to spy on their former comrade in arms who allied with the Irish government. Cumann were also partaking in spying in Cumann for the National Army, and also assisted the National Army in searching women, limiting Cumann's ability to smuggle arms. This gave Cumann the nickname Cumann the Searchers. Cumann also attacked Cumann in anti-treaty news sheets, calling Cumann leader Wise Power a light in the anemic women's organisation known as Cumann. Then towards the end of 1922, more direct action was taken against Cumann. Their offices in Rutland Square in Dublin was bombed, and in December, Wise Power, along with 3 other members of the Cumann, Alice Stoffer Green, Ellen Cuff and Eileen Costello, were elected to Seanad Éireann. But Wise Power was targeted by anti-treaty irregulars, and in December 1922, her premises in Camden Street were bombed. However, that was all the damage done to Cumann during the Civil War. On the Cumann side, some of the women were taken prisoner, and in February 1923, 23 women took part in a hunger strike for 34 days due to imprisonment of Republican prisoners. This worked and the women were released. In March 97 women went on hunger strike due to their privileges being denied. However, these strikes did have a casualty. Annie Hogan, an imprisoned member of Cumann, died due to hunger strike. She was released in September 1923, but she did die shortly after that. In May 1923, the Civil War ended in a pro-treaty victory. After the Civil War concluded, Cumann quietly dissolved itself. Their function was fulfilled with the conclusion of the Civil War. Although the war was over, the bitterness of the divide remained for a long time, but as stated by Mary McAuliffe, common enemies and common causes would paper over some Civil War animosity in the years after, as pro-treaty women would collaborate with former anti-treaty women over matters such as politics and misogyny. The Irish Civil War caused a great division on the island even ages after it concluded. Although it was mainly pictured as a brother versus brother conflict, it was not only that. It was also sister versus sister. On Cogadh, the War of the Women, or the Women's War.
Honor to Auckland the Heron, all praise to the men of our race, who in days of betrayal and slavery saved Ireland from ruin and disgrace. But do not forget in your praising of them and the deeds they have done. They're loyal and true-hearted comrades, the soldiers of Cumann. They stand for the honour of Ireland as our sisters in days that are gone. They march with their brothers to freedom, the soldiers of Cumann. No brave-hearted daughter of Ireland